Hello and welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Narendran. I have a big panel with me today which is going to be setting the agenda for Modi 2.0. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here. This is of course a panel that's been organized by the Confederation for Indian Industry. I'll come with Uday Kotak first. You were supposed to be CII president, but that didn't happen. I remember that very clearly when Chandrajit said you have another big project to do, which is to fix INFS. A world record from 5% to 90% NPA. Look at liquidity. Would you say this is one of the biggest tasks before the new government? It has to be done ASAP.
First of all, I have to thank my colleague Vikram Kirloskar for agreeing to step in as president, and Chandrajit, Banerjee and the team to really enable this from a CII point of view. So I'm grateful to CII for giving that flexibility. And I think in many
Hello and welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Narendran. I have a big panel with me today which is going to be setting the agenda for Modi 2.0. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here. This is of course a panel that's been organized by the Confederation for Indian Industry. I'll come with Uday Kotak first. You were supposed to be CII president, but that didn't happen. I remember that very clearly when Chandrajit said you have another big project to do, which is to fix INFS. A world record from 5% to 90% NPA. Look at liquidity. Would you say this is one of the biggest tasks before the new government? It has to be done ASAP.
First of all, I have to thank my colleague Vikram Kirloskar for agreeing to step in as president, and Chandrajit, Banerjee and the team to really enable this from a CII point of view. So I'm grateful to CII for giving that flexibility. And I think in many ways what we are seeing is challenges to the financial sector.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the important agendas on the new government's plate, and I'm very hopeful and confident that the new government, along with the regulators, which is RBI and SEBI, will find and evolve appropriate solutions to a sustainability in the financial sector, which is a key engine for India's economic growth.
Mr. Kotak, that's all well and good, but we're already seeing a lot of pain points. Look at what's happening with auto sales. Look what's happening in the real estate sector. Liquidity is a big problem. So while the Reserve Bank is trying certain out-of-the-box measures, how bad is it?
In my view, first of all, liquidity has improved. High quality NBFCs are beginning to get finance at lower credit spreads, and we need to divide the liquidity issue into availability and price. So on the price front, I think one of the things which is holding back the price of money is the fact that we also have a significant small savings growth in the Indian economy, which is funding our fiscal deficit at rates higher than deposit rates. So that is making liquidity available, but the price of money is moving less fast than it should in terms of cost of money and transmission of the RBI rates. The second one is availability. This is now Indian economy and the Indian financial sector is evolving. Savers and investors are getting smarter. Therefore, if the risk of an institution is higher, availability becomes a problem. Therefore, the marketplace is choosing between good quality financial institutions and others. So I think from a long-term point of view, discerning investors are good for economic growth.
But Mr. Kotak, the problem is, and what a lot of people have feared is that the contagion, if I could call it that, from INFS was contained on account of elections. Now that elections are over, will the entire problem be revealed as how bad it is, how deep the rot actually is, and we could have a cascading impact, which is a big threat to the economy? How real is that fear?
My view is the problem in the financial system overall is not systemic. There are pockets of challenges, but it is not certainly something which needs to become a contagion. And I do believe that the government, along with the regulators, can manage the transition with some appropriate steps as we go forward.
What would those steps be?
I think the steps which I would like to see go forward is, number one, ensure that different fiduciaries in the financial system, whether it is governance of financial institutions, whether it is auditors, whether it's rating agencies, regulatory oversight, these fiduciaries, in addition of course to the managements and boards of the companies, do their job appropriately. It brings me back to what is a very important statement by the Prime Minister, which is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. The financial sector and corporate India needs to build Vishwas with savers and investors. The trust is extremely important. And one of CII's key theme in the current year is building trust between industry, government and society.
Having said that, Mr. Kotak, what I did notice when you took out the agenda, you haven't talked about taking tough decisions. These could be write-offs. These could be allowing certain NBFCs to fail. Does that have to take place?
No, my view is we need to evolve the transition. There is no one solution for everything, but you got to look at it granularly and specifically for each case and ensure that we contain the challenges in the financial sector. But I do believe we need to nurture and grow the financial sector, because if India aspires to 9 to 10% GDP growth, the financial sector, which is a key catalyst for that growth, has to step up on the plate and increase its contribution to funding and supporting the Indian economy.
Budget on July 5th, coming close to the heels of, one quarter seeing sub 6% growth after a very long time. China overtaking India in that sense also when it comes to becoming the fastest growing economy on the planet. What would your expectation be from Nirmala Sitharaman come July 5th?
My view is that with a set of policies which I'm sure this government is aware of, as we know they have a 100-day plan and a longer plan, I do believe that we can manage to move the Indian economy to a 7% or a higher growth on a weighted average basis. We may be starting slow, but we can always pick up momentum through the year, and we've got a long time ahead for the rest of the year.
But she has to balance, she has to pump prime the economy, because the private sector is still being quite stubborn on that fact, and this fiscal consolidation, and all of the bond markets will cry hoarse if the fiscal deficit target is missed.
I think we got to get some animal spirits back, and time has come for us to see how we use the levers of some fiscal stimulus within a range.
So we need a fiscal stimulus?
Within a range. I don't think we should go overboard. And something from monetary policy. So a tandem between fiscal policy and monetary policy, like perfect music,
but
Indian
what's the point
music.
of another rate cut if it's not going to be
That is where I think transmission is extremely important, which is where I believe the small savings rates in the economy, which is the rate at which the government is borrowing from small savings like national savings certificates and others, are getting disproportionate flows which are funding the fiscal deficit. So deposit rates are finding it difficult to go down, and therefore we need to, for transmission, get the overall
You're expecting a
alignment.
rate cut this week?
I think the market consensus is that there should be a rate cut, and I'm sure that the RBI is conscious about the economy. But let's wait till the 6th of June.
Mr. Kotak, before I let you go, and I know you have that appointment, is there any update that you can give us on INFS? That is something the markets are watching out for.
As you know, this is a CII panel.
Fair enough.
And therefore, I would like to say that
because that's something that impacts all of
I
industry.
think the financial sector needs nurturing, hand-holding and enabling growth to be able to support the real economy. I am always a believer that the financial sector does not have a life of its own. Its basic job is to serve the real sector.
Even when you have pain points like commodity cycles, what you're seeing with the trade war, etc.
But I think it's a huge positive. The commodity cycle being modest is good for India.
Bad news for him.
But also, I think, look at the world. US interest rates long term are dropped. They are lower than the overnight rates. So that is also a positive for India. Therefore, amidst all the negative macro, these two are big positive macros globally in India's favor.
Vikram Kirloskar, CII President, look at the mandate, the thumping victory by Narendra Modi, a referendum of sorts. That would mean that a lot more of expectations from him as well. You've come out with a new document, Agenda for the New Government. I think the first point has to be to get growth back. We're seeing engines of a slowdown beginning with the auto sector.
Yes. Last few months have been tough in the auto sector. What we are saying is two major issues of growth. One is investment and the other is consumption. And we have to do something to push both. I think on the investment, we have already discussed this, saying, can we reduce the cost of equity? Equity seems to be much more costly than debt, and the whole industry is full of debt, and I think that's one of the reasons why the growth is also slowing down, because of the high debt, the cost of that. Finally, you have to be competitive to sell. You can say I can remove debt from tax, blah blah blah, and all these things. But finally, if your cost, your selling price is not good and not the same with the rest of the world, the quality is not good, you cannot do well. So investment is one issue. We're requesting the government to look at reducing the cost of equity by reducing the taxes on equity. Second is on the consumption side. How do we increase consumption? Basic increase in consumption is sentiment. You know, I feel more confident of the days ahead. Therefore, I'm willing to spend. I'm willing to take some retail finance. So that's one thing which is going to happen. I'm certain, with the kind of confidence the country has shown in Mr. Modi and his government, and a strong, powerful government going ahead will certainly help in that sentiment. Second is we see the stock markets going up. It certainly helps with, for example, the larger vehicles or larger refrigerators or televisions or various other things. That kind of consumption, I think, the growth in the stock.
Disposable income, you mean?
Yeah, disposable income will improve with stock market improvement. Second is if the interest rates do come down, as Uday has spoken about. He said the issue is not just the liquidity, it's the cost of liquidity. If that comes down, I think you'll see the lower end of the market as well picking up. We've generally talked about, you know, rationalizing the tax, going back to rationalizing the tax, lower exemptions, or reduce the.
Everybody wants lower taxes, whether it's industry or the individual taxpayer.
But remove the exemptions.
Remove the exemptions, and I think this is the government that has always spoken about it.
We are suggesting on the corporate tax that remove the exemptions so you're revenue neutral and reduce the tax. That's one. And I think on the personal tax, we are suggesting up to 5 lakhs. Go for zero tax. You still file a return for zero tax. It's a zero tax.
Stevie, Narendran, what is it going to take for the private sector to start investing again? If there has been one theme in the first term of the Modi government, is that the capex cycle is not really come back. It's been primarily the government pump priming the economy and increasing expenditure.
I think there are 3 factors which matter. One is demand, which has been positive but has not been enough to trigger the investments that you're talking about. Because the other 2 factors which are important is the availability of money, and I think the liquidity issue has certainly played its part. It's available for the marquee kind of borrowers, but not available to everyone. And the third part is profitability of industry, you know, because ultimately industry will invest when they see profitability, and good demand sometimes doesn't necessarily mean good profits. So all these 3 factors have to come together. I think the government's focus on the ease of doing business and also CII now pushing for the cost of doing business, I think these 2 factors will play a role in hopefully improving the profitability of the business, which will trigger then private investments. I think some sectors have invested, but I agree with you, across the board, investments have been driven more by the government's expenditure than by private sector.
Chandrajit, Banerjee, you know, I don't think it's possible to make a country's budget in 5 weeks. So, you know, the predominant view also seems to be that the budget was ready perhaps even before the election, and now final touches are being given to it, etc. Because, you know, just from the feasibility perspective. So having said that, the budget, you know, for this government has never been the one area where you make announcements. It's done through the year. And I think that this Narendra Modi has done that. But what are 1 or 2 big things that will be needed to bring growth back? He's talked about, for example, corporate tax. He's talked about removing incentives and just get the investment cycle back.
So, you know, one of the things that one would really like to see is something which is completely out of the box in the budget. And it's not something like a big bang, but then as you said, that it will be spread over maybe many weeks and months. But something that could be initiated is to see how some of the concern areas are well addressed. So what main concern area that you talked about was lack of demand, or how do you get investments really back on track. But one big area is, say, for instance, employment, and which relates to this entire issue of investment, etc. So one of the things that one would like to see are really choosing some of these sectors which can trigger the economy. Say, for instance, tourism as a sector, which can really be a game changer to the economy. The construction sector, which can be a game changer to the economy. All of these sectors would have phenomenal effect in terms of trickle down. So have someone like a sort of a czar that you appoint for the tourism sector, set a target, make all the changes that are necessary, see to it how you can make that quantum jump, And that really leads to a trigger in the economy across the sectors, be it the construction sector, as I mentioned, or the tourism, or even other sectors like, say, for instance, the automobile sector, which are the garment, the textile sector, so to say. So these are sector-specific interventions, if one can see. And the second, for bringing in much more surety from the terms of view of from the point of view of the investors, bring in a roadmap of the taxation. And
that did happen earlier, right? That happened.
But we need to see the movement towards that roadmap. We need to see more and more sectors coming in, and what would be those time frames, and that brings in a lot of confidence for the investor community.
Vikram Kirloskar, while you all will want that roadmap, and it's so secret, no one likes to pay taxes. But having said that, while you might be so upset about automobile sales coming down, even FMCG has shown that it's not resilient, it is not recession-proof. So that just shows how bad the problem is really turning out to be. The question I also want to ask you is that at a time like this, if domestic industry is not going to pitch in, are you seeing foreign investors show the same kind of fervor they were perhaps in 2014?
See, I think, Mr. Modi should do what he's really good at, and that is bring a behavioral change. He brought a behavioral change using Swachh Bharat, which was very effective, I feel. Because I know in the areas where our factories are, and I'm sure other people do, but I know for sure in our area, it went to zero defecation free outside. The whole mentality changes. The way of working, the attitude towards life, everything changes. If we want to get seriously foreign investment in a large way out here, we have to have a change of attitude and change of behavior. Clean the country, better trust between government, society and industry. We have to change our behavior. And it's these things. I think it's like a qualitative, it's hard to really say exactly what, but it's a change in our attitude towards the country itself, that we want to be proud of our country, we want to make it the best, and that Mr. Modi is great at doing. He needs to push that first, I think.
There are a lot of things that are not in Narendra Modi's hands. TV Narendran, look what's happening, for example, between China and the United States. Look what has happened now over the weekend also when it comes to India and US and their trade understanding. We've already seen a response that's been put out from the commerce industry. Now, you can't do much if the tariffs are going up, and we don't know, for example, what's going to happen with Mexico either, but these are things that Narendra Modi can't control. But Piyush Goyal certainly will have his task cut out. You already see what's happening with the IT sector. From that perspective, what's your expectation from the Modi government?
So I think the best thing we can do as a country is to get the domestic consumption back, because one thing which we have, which many other countries don't have, is a large domestic market, a young market, a growing market. So we need to leverage that better, because it's a fact that the world is getting more and more insular as far as trade is concerned. While it will be a positive for us if India and the US and China sorts out its trade issues, but I think we should better leverage what we have with us. And if something else happens outside which is better for us, that's a bonus.
But what is industry doing? Like, what are you guys doing
I think,
ring fence yourselves?
Yeah, so firstly, the domestic demand story is still quite strong. I think if I look at the steel industry, for instance, the fact that the government is going to focus on infrastructure is good for the demand. We believe that rural electrification, for instance, has done wonders. If you build rural roads, you're opening up large parts of the country which is not accessible today to markets. So I think a lot of efficiencies are also coming in with GST. A lot of supply chain transformation is going on. A lot of warehouses are being built across the country. So I think the efficiencies are coming in. The costs of doing business are going down. And I think I'm quite positive about the consumption story. It's gone down a bit also because food prices have not been going up, and so incomes have not been going into the rural economy. So I think with some of these schemes which have been announced, more money will go into the rural economy. And also with...
And in fact, they've got the ground hitting like literally from day one.
Absolutely.
The first cabinet meeting that took place. So if in 2014, the first cabinet meeting was to attack black money, and that's the theme that you saw over the 5 years. One would imagine Chandrajit, Banerjee, that what they've done with the pension scheme, what they've done now with extending the for the benefit for the farmers, the first cabinet meet. Do you suspect that's going to be the big focus area?
I think it has to be. Actually, what we really need to see is how we can really, you talk about a 10% plus growth. And how would a 10% plus growth be much more meaningful for the country? And therefore,
it's inclusive.
Which has to be inclusive. And therefore, a huge focus one sees coming in, and as you mentioned, on say on the farm side, on the insurance scheme that the Prime Minister has talked about for the farmers' insurance, say for instance. That gives confidence. That gives confidence for investments by the farm sector. That also gives a tremendous impetus to growth in the farm sector. So risk taking ability really goes up, and that really helps. So doubling farmers' income, focusing on the rural economy, connecting the rural economy digitally as well as through hard infrastructure. I think that's going to be one of the most important key things that one would look forward from the Narendra Modi 2.0.
So, taking forward that's also, of course, going to depend on the weather gods, what kind of a monsoon we're going to have, what will happen to tractor sales, the farm output. But having said that, Vikram Kirloskar, you're also, for example, from manufacturing, as is TV Narendran. You can't talk about jobs, manufacturing, and that has been one big pain point. What's it going to take to change that?
See, you talked of information technology. It did fantastically. It's one of the largest parts of the world right now. It did. Why did information technology do so well? It was highly competitive, lowest in cost, very high quality, and they could deliver. Okay. Competitiveness is going to be the key on the manufacturing side either. Okay, and it's whatever policy that will help competitiveness will increase employment in manufacturing as well as investment in manufacturing. So first is investment in manufacturing and employment.
The industrial policy, for example, that we keep hearing about.
How do you make industry very, very competitive? That is the key. ITS became competitive because there was no government policy. It became greatly competitive, and that's why it's all over the world. No one has been able to stop information technology from being exported with whatever kind of issues there are. People don't go to this country, that all kinds of restrictions coming up. It's still going on because it's very competitive. And that's the same way we have to make our industry.
I think one of the things that's also standing in the way of this, of course, is liquidity. I'll make this my final question, Mr. Narendran. I'll come to you. It's very difficult to do that when banks are not lending. At a time also when there's a distrust that whether it's for genuine business failure, for whatever reasons, banks are not being repaid. Now, you've had a big interaction, if I could call it that, as far as the insolvency and bankruptcy code goes. It's an evolving code, and of course, it's going to be improved, and part of the 100-year agenda is also that. What would your wish list be? How can this code be strengthened?
I think it's been a great beginning as far as the IBC is concerned, and it's amazing that assets of such value have transferred hands over the last few years. I think the one part of it which was great, but in the execution it has faltered a bit, is the 270-day time limit. I think it's very important to stick to the timelines, because these are assets which are lying around, and when it's in a gray area between one owner and the other, a lot of harm can come to the asset. While there are resolution professionals who are handling it, but it's unfair to expect that they will be able to manage assets for extended periods of time. The original thought process was everything would get over in 270 days. So I think we need to, obviously for that, support the judiciary, give them the resources, but also avoid very frivolous kind of attempts to derail the process. I think the government is conscious of that, and the efficiency of the process is very important to drive its effectiveness.
Okay, and at a time, Mr. Banerjee, I am going to ask you this. There is also this entire issue of corporate governance. For whatever reasons, there is a significant deterioration in corporate governance. Look what's happening with a whole host of promoters. The auditor's role is also coming up. So is there a fear within the industry that everybody could be painted with the same brush, that maybe the government will not be as discerning as you would like it to be?
So there are two issues here, and that we've been talking about, and it really emanates from what we earlier talked about, sabka viswas. And I think that trust needs to be established both ways. And I think there is a lot that the government could do in terms of giving that space. But at the same time, there is a huge obligation on the part of the industry to show that it can lead with certain examples. There are great examples. And I think, therefore, it's a very strong testing time to say for the Indian industry. And therefore, we have created within CII something called an Ethics and Governance Committee. And that's something that we would see to it that voluntarily, today, India, if you go back, India was a champion of voluntary codes and in terms of corporate governance. And I think it's now extremely important for us to demonstrate that, to win back the trust that we expect from the government. And I think the corporate sector has a tremendous ownership and onus on itself to show and lead in terms of corporate governance.
And with that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us here and setting the agenda for Modi 2.0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.